think it's important to have EQ, EQ versus IQ. I recognize in retrospect that I have more EQ than IQ. I think in early stage organizations, if you know that you have that emotional quotient, that is so important for all levels of motivation, inspiration, for feedback that isn't necessarily appreciated, but is necessary. So I would encourage people to really work on their EQ and their connection.
Welcome back to Fearless Founders. I have my personal friend, rugby expert, and multiple exit startup guru in the cybersecurity arena. And I'm really glad that we've got Tom Turner here. And you'll detect immediately as he talks that we have other similarities in common beyond rugby and software. So Tom, thanks, man. Thank you very much for joining us. I really appreciate you spending the time today.
Thank you, Benoit. I'm looking forward to it, and always love talking about myself.
Yes, we're experts on that, aren't we? Each of us.
Yes.
Hey, so with that said, I can tell the crew as they're listening and watching that you've had quite a few exits, but more importantly than that, you have a unique background of being on both continents, from England and having made a home in New England. And so it's always fun to learn a little bit about the personal individual. Could you just give us a little background as we segue into what you did and how you are now in this retired zone?
Yeah, sure. So I'm an Anglo-American, and my experience has been very Anglo-American. I have a father from Texas and a mother from Yorkshire in England. I grew up in Yorkshire, which is in the northeast of England. And then after university, I ended up getting a job in New Hampshire, just north of Boston. And one thing led to another, and that's where my career was launched. I ended up getting involved in the high-tech cybersecurity world, met my wife, and I have lived in New England ever since. So, and my career has taken me back and forth across the Atlantic. And I think that was also a nice thing to take part in as someone who's half English, half American.
You've got to tell the crew, what about rugby that you have an association / connection with that I think they would be interested to learn? And by the way, our viewers and listeners, Tom is built like a strong rugby player.
So I went to school I went to a boarding school in the north of England that was famous for its rugby. In fact, that was all you were allowed to play. Ironically, I was a swimmer and didn't really like rugby at the time. But when I finally grew into this frame that you very graciously call strong, Benoit, turns out I quite enjoyed the game at university and have played it into my early 50s. And now one of the things that I do in the spring is I coach a boys high school rugby team. And rugby's been a funny theme throughout my career too, because it was always a bit of a differentiator when it came to showing up at meetings with a black eye or a marked up face. It was always easy to get the conversation going, even in the tensest of times. So I love the game. I love what it has afforded me, and I enjoy trying to get other people to be interested in it and you get the benefits that I have.
And in fact, didn't you have an association also with the USA Eagles somewhere that you had in part?
Well, so I mean, the closest I can say is that we hosted my rugby club in the northeast of New England in New Hampshire, we hosted the U.S. Eagles in one of their largest rugby matches at the time in the late 90s against Ireland. And then some of the boys that I have coached have gone on to some pretty good things in the U.S. rugby establishment, with a few of them showing up in what they call the Eagles pool. Eagles is the name of the U.S. national team. So yeah, that's about as close as I got.
Thank you. It's always fun, and we won't talk about England's surprising win over France, but we'll leave that alone for now. We'll leave that for now. Hey, so tell me about the cybersecurity world, and how many companies have you been involved with now that have exited to the point that you are now on this show as a successful entrepreneur who can give some advice? How many companies? Just give us a little bit of that taste.
Sure. So I think 4 early stage cybersecurity companies, 3 of which were acquired while I was there and acquired into bigger companies. And then the final company, which is an early stage, is still a standalone company in its own right that one day will hopefully go public, or maybe become the 4th company to be acquired. Cybersecurity is something that I fell into completely by accident in 1998. And just to sort of give you a sense, most people today are aware of cybersecurity as a technical and a business problem. I think IT Harvest is an analyst firm that tracks over 3,300 IT security companies around the globe. And I think the worldwide spend on IT security today is around $190 billion. Back in 1998, there might have been 50 to 75 companies in IT cybersecurity, and perhaps the spend was around $1 billion. So it was a very niche part of the IT networking environment. And again, I ended up there purely because I wanted a job closer to the city of Boston, where I had met a young woman who is, still a young woman, but now my wife. So that's how I ended up there. And it's obviously changed a great deal. But yeah, it was a very small niche market, and is now pretty significant part of and a significant thought at board levels in companies of all sizes because of the implications of not being secure.
Yes, absolutely. What role did you play generally? Were you a finance guy, an ops guy, a sales guy?
I started off in marketing. So I was in market. I was the product manager of a family of products in the first company that I joined, which was ostensibly a marketing position. And then marketing was always part of my remit at subsequent companies, as I ended up getting deeper into partnerships, business development, sales. And my last company, I was both the president and the CEO. So, I had a much broader set of responsibilities than my earliest times in cyber. But marketing was always the thing that I started with, and is still, and was something that I remain very passionate about because it was so important in this particular market space.
As you look at the growth of each of those companies in terms of physical number of bodies,
yeah,
I know what you're going to say, but it's really worth saying and asking you this. What were the challenges as you had to bring on more people in order to meet the client needs, whether it be new business or customer retention or whatever? What was it like, and what did you learn from the growth of adding humans to the teams?
Yeah. Well, look, in each company, the learnings were a little different, in part because of the the timing of the market, and also the different scales of organizations. So, some of the earlier companies that I joined, I was always in the first 30 people into a company. The earliest of those never grew beyond 50 before it was acquired. The next, maybe 100 people. But then after that, when you get to, 300 people, 700 people, the challenges that I always saw with it, the hard work of making sure that people are on message, understand what they're doing, and that they have an operational cadence that is consistent and gets renewed based on the learnings of a broader and broader set of people. I think that's always the challenge of that is always underestimated. It's not very sexy, fun work to make sure that, whether it's your customer success people, your marketers, your inside sales, your enterprise salespeople, whether you are continually growing and reaffirming a motion that is successful for the company as well as successful to the clients they're serving. That was a consistent theme, no matter the size of organization. And it's sort of it's the hard yards that a lot of people don't want to do because there are always things that are more fun. But that was the most important thing.
I couldn't agree more. Part of what I'm facing now every day as I interact with a lot of fast growth CEOs, tech space or not, is the age-old complaint. Business would be easy if it weren't for people. And the people side needs absolute focus and dedication, from core value alignment to procedures and systems that have been put in place for scaling. And it's the lack of adherence to it that causes more issues than the absence of the systems, right?
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah. And I'm sure you've got lots of stories, and we're going to talk about the pains and the wins of it. But the reason I asked you that question is because you've gone through this 4 times, and each successive time, you realize you've got to get the teams aligned, that there's no lack of telephone tag separation of the original message all the way down to the front line. Because then it all gets permutated and people have their own interpretation of that, and it's off key.
Right? That's right. I think I was always a marketing person that people thought worked in sales. So it's always very customer focused. And one of the learnings early in my career was the more sales calls that I went on with the customer facing representatives of the organizations that I worked at, the more I found out how diverse their approach was to, conversations weren't uniform, descriptions of benefits that the customer, would get from the various solutions that we offered didn't line up. And so that was early on, that was an important learning, that marketing, and at least in the marketing organizations that I ran, could not just be a silo. They had to be very tightly partnered with sales, and the feedback loop between the two was critical, because, for your viewers and your listeners and the people who follow your podcasts, the most important thing to get right is your engagement with your customers at the early stages. It never goes away, but obviously as you become more successful and you get more scale in your business, there are other things that come up. But, until you win customers, until there's revenue associated with that, until there is then success for the customer to feed back into that, that uniform approach based on, successful engagements in the past and learning from, unsuccessful engagements too. It has to be worked on and worked on and worked on. And that was always a sales and marketing partnership done right. When sales and marketing don't function together very tightly, that's where it goes wrong.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. I'm going to ask a line of questions related to marketing. Is there and should there be a natural tension between the leader of the marketing organization and the leader of the sales organization?
I've heard that said. I don't think there doesn't have to be a natural tension. I always prefer to think about it that there should be a set of shared conversion points. That if you can agree that you must always meet and talk about these conversion points in an engagement with the client. Now, maybe there's tension around resolving issue. Maybe those conversion points aren't working as well. But I don't think tension has to be the sort of the lasting characteristic. It actually has to be, can we agree that the most important place to continue to measure our joint success are these 2 or 3 points in the funnel, if you're talking about your internal way of managing the sales and marketing engine, or in the customer journey and customer engagement when we're thinking about the customer facing involvement between your organization and the clients that you hope to earn. So I've had tension, but more important has been can we agree and then work through those particular areas when the conversion points aren't functioning the way that we think they should.
Great. That's a good and wise counsel on that. When it comes to the actual revenue making machine, there's a portion that says marketing should be more lead gen versus brand, demand gen versus the perception of the business. What is your advice on how marketing should be construed, and does it change based on the size of the company?
Well, so yes, it does change. Now, I will say that I always tended to major in the demand generation, engagement in the funnel, engagement in the funnel journey from a client expressing some level of interest in a problem, all the way down to that company adopting your solution and trying to find. That's always where I spent more of my time. I actually think that's where early stage companies have to, CMOs or VPs of marketing should spend more of their time. But that isn't the case for all organizations. So I was, early at a company called Q1 Labs. We were getting ready to file our IPO, and IBM purchased us. So I went from being head of marketing and business development for an organization of 300, 400 people to now I was running IBM's security portfolio across all its business units as its CMO. And that was an organization, IBM, that majored in brand and advertising and quite rightly so in most cases regarding its business. And so I think it isn't uniform. I think for the people who follow your organization, your podcasts, I think it absolutely is the area to focus on. And brand can be an expensive distraction that leads to kind of leads to a scenario where VPs of marketing or CMOs, they change quite frequently, right? And I don't always know why that is, but sometimes I'm pretty sure it's because the funnel's not working, and the funnel is a function of sales and marketing integration in all companies, and in the early stages, it's the most important area to work through.
I am a supporter of what you said. I called myself a revenue marketeer in the organization because I only did small businesses. So
Yeah.
I had to hit the ground running, and I had to make contribution that was measurable.
Correct.
And not just airy-fairy pamphlets from a plane.
Correct.
And we had to do the basics. And
yes.
you suffer really quickly when you look into the ROI. Where did the dollar go when
Right.
you don't have a compensatory revenue attributed to it?
Yep.
Big time.
Yeah.
So here comes the question then. So when sales teams don't adhere to the messaging, to the required documentation in the CRM, the marketing so dearly needs in order to be able to measure conversion points, to measure attribution to what produced what. How did you help the tight teaming between sales and marketing?
So look, that's an excellent question. I think that there were two things that I was very big on for myself in the role, as well as the teams that I hired specifically in marketing. And the first was to be very customer facing. In other words, to go on sales calls. I would never ask any salesperson or my peer in running sales, the VP of sales, we didn't have CROs back then, but the head of sales, I would never ask them to pitch a customer or deliver a presentation if I couldn't do it. And I asked the same of my team. And so that goes a long way in sort of starting to build connection between marketing and sales organizations if you're walking in someone else's shoes. The second thing I think is important is, rather than just complaining and pointing out, okay, you're not giving me a feedback loop on the leads that I got, or you're not keeping the opportunity record up to date in Salesforce. Rather than just complaining about that, I'd pick the areas of success that showed why that was important and spend a lot of time at sales meetings, whether they were the worldwide sales meeting or whether it was QBRs, showing how you actually become a more effective salesperson. You have better conversion rates. You close your pipeline quicker if you take advantage of these things. And so I think that's a much more positive way to do it, because it speaks to making the individual better, making his or her goal more attainable, rather than saying rather than just majoring on you're not meeting a marketing SLA. And that again is easier to do if your salespeople know you're quite capable of going to a meeting with them and carrying the conversation and delivering the presentation. They take that feedback a lot better. And it makes you a better marketer.
Yes. Well done, by the way. Congrats on picking on the positive, accentuating that and encouraging that in a sort of a team level of disclosure, so people are motivated in a group setting to see, whoa, it does work. Maybe I should pick up my end of the responsibility.
Right.
I get it. In this journey, you've had small teams, bigger teams. What was the largest size of the marketing team specifically that you created?
So I think at IBM, I always get the numbers confused because I had both marketing and channels for IBM Security. So I had about 200 people across
That's plenty.
globe. So that was the biggest marketing team that I ran.
If you were to advise our first-time founders who are contemplating growing the business, having more people underneath them out of necessity, out of want, what advice would you give as to being a good leader of growing groups of people, beyond that first statement where you said, making sure that they're on message and so forth? What does it take to be a good leader, and lessons learned along your journey?
Well, I think it's important to have EQ, EQ versus IQ. I recognize in retrospect that I have more EQ than IQ. I think in early stage organizations. If you know that you have that emotional quotient, that is so important for all levels of motivation, inspiration, for feedback that isn't necessarily appreciated, but is necessary. So I would encourage people to really work on their EQ and their connection, because in the early stage organizations, I always found people were the biggest motivator for me. And so I recognized that I needed to be able to mirror that from people, for people who were looking for the same. I believe in, I don't believe in a lot of hierarchy. And I think being able to keep things flat, and that is both about communication as well as, responsibility. I would always preach the value of leadership over management. I think people are still today so confused about their ability to lead being solely tied to the number of people who report to them in an org chart. And I think early stage companies, of course, when somebody joins a marketing department, a sales organization, anywhere in an early stage organization, they have aspirations of growing their career. And often that means they hope that they will have people that work for them and they can have a department they can build out. But, that is entirely constrained by the success of the company. And you still need to motivate those great people that you've hired, even if their plans for promotion and growing their managerial skills base are delayed by slower time to revenue in the organization, slower growth. So I do think that's really important in the early stage, to make people realize that to be a leader, you don't have to have people reporting to you. You have to be, you can have impact across the company. You can have impact at all levels. So yeah, I think, work on your EQ. Don't promote hierarchies, especially in early stage organizations, and preach the value of leadership more than management. And a funny story. So when I arrived at IBM, I learned that if I was asking for an update on a particular segment of the security business from a marketing perspective, or information on a geography, my early stage company experience expected that I would just jump on either an in-person meeting, or I'd jump on I think it was called GoToMeeting back then. I forget, Zoom didn't exist. And I would have an interactive discussion with the members of the team. Come to find out that this was a very hierarchical place, where the presentation had been practiced 2 or 3 times with my subordinates before it got to me. Incredible waste of time, too much filtering of the message. And so you'd be surprised. And I guess the reason I share that is you'd be surprised how quickly that starts in a company. If you aren't very clear about, look, I don't want hierarchy in all things. I want to be able to, see leadership regardless of title. And in my case, I liked having an environment where humor was important, where, people outside of work as almost as well as them in work. So I think for your early stage leaders, those are things to think about.
Great. Can you give a simplified definition of your leader versus manager? Because you brought that up. Tell us, what do you mean by the two?
Well, I think a leader takes responsibility and jumps in with both his or her feet, regardless of whether the org chart or the hierarchy dictates that they should do that on behalf of others. And a leader can also and should also demonstrate confidence, and the confidence should not be tied to the title, or the number of people that that roll up to that individual. Now, confidence is an important word, not arrogance, confidence. And because in early stage companies in particular, while the founder or the CEO or the head of the company is responsible for a lot of inspiration and direction, it is a mistake to think that everything should come from that founder, from that leader, from that CEO. And some of the more important ideas at companies that I was involved with in the early stages came from multiple levels of the organization. From a salesperson who discovered a seam of customers who happened to respond well to a message that led to a vertical marketing campaign that had never been conceived of by the management team. And so I think that's an example of leadership, because in this case, this particular person had the confidence to say, I'm onto something here, and I'm confident enough to present it to people and see what they think. So,
yeah, I learned recently through a great organization called Leader Factor that there are 4 stages of psychological safety, and that the leader versus manager not only inspires confidence, but they are open to challenges to the existing way businesses run, the systems and procedure. And I've learned that leadership is not just, are people willing to follow, while managers are more likely to be inspectors of and supporters of existing teams. The leaders inspire for change to happen with people willingly wanting to do it, willingly wanting to follow them. And there's a marked contrast between under the thumb of a manager versus wanting to follow and make big impact with discretionary effort unnecessarily provided because they want to do it. So it's a big distinction for me, at least.
You said it better than I did, Benoit.
No. I think about that all the time. I'll tell you a quick story. I just had a remarkable meeting with a partner of a very successful company who said, I don't get it. I support my teams. I train them. I set clear expectations of where to go. I give them ample time to stretch their wings and ultimately for them to succeed. But invariably, he said with a lot of exasperation, this was Monday, with a lot of exasperation, they keep botching it up. They are screwing it up so much so that I'm back involved in cleaning up the mess, and clients and expectations are completely trashed. I said, oh, that is very frustrating. And so I said, so you give them enough training to do the job and then some? Yes. You give them enough compensation and time to be able to experiment? Yes. You give them real world, not just simulated work to be able to deliver? Yes. Then I said, may I ask, what happens when they fail? Because I heard something very important. And he said, I go in and clean up the mess. With no punishment and or consequences for having failed to meet the expected outcome that they agreed to provide. He hung his head and said, I see where you're getting at. Right?
Yeah.
He was enabling.
Yes.
He was enabling a culture of incompetence, and that it was okay because Big Daddy was going to come in and clean up for them.
Yep. Look, I often went into company. I was never the person who came up with an idea. I'm not technical at all. Never have been. I mean, you see me in board meetings. It's lucky if I can read the PDF. But I've often found that I would enter a company and there would be a founder who would be brilliant technically, very good in front of the customer. And the biggest problem to solve was, how do you pull that founder out of every meeting that is happening in the company? How do you pull that founder out of every customer engagement? How do you essentially take all the good stuff from that founder's brain about the things that, you know, the offering can do, the problems it can solve for the customer, and how do you put it in someone like me, who's not a brilliant founder? And I think that's, you know, again, for your audience, maybe there are some, you know, founder leaders, right, who are at the sharp end of, you know, most of the customer engagements and most of the great early revenue wins. And that's amazing. But if you can't transition to the point where there are sales suddenly that are happening that he or she has never touched, then you will remain an awesome founder of a small early stage company. And I like to think that people like me, you know, one of my skills was, how do I get through that to that next layer so that it can be done by mere mortals, right? The normal, the everyday sales, marketing, customer success, product management, finance people who are very good at building companies, you know, once they've understood what's the success recipe that can be transmitted to a much broader set of people.
It's very hard to do, because your value is tied to being not just critical to revenue and product, but your value is tied to feeling important and needed.
Yes.
That your ability to make impact is based on people coming to the know-it-all,
yeah,
and having them feel obligated to
right.
pay homage to the great guru on the hill.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's hard to get out of that mode.
It's very hard. And also because what salesperson doesn't want to take the best person to their client? What client isn't flattered by having the founder of a company spend special time with them? And so it is there. It's not a breaking; it's a teasing apart of that, so
Nice.
that you can save that founder for the largest opportunities, the most important meetings on the product, and that is, again, for your audience, that's a way to think of, you know, maturation in the company, and you can even sort of assign goals to it. You know, I shouldn't be on, and you know, we know we have solved a problem when I'm no longer in any first meetings with a client.
Yes.
You know, I know that the next stage is I'm not involved in any sales that aren't above, you know, this size or this level of complexity. I mean, those are ways that you can track progress in an organization.
Agreed. I've even got to the point that I've said, if you were to dissect your calendar and color code it between customer facing, you see, with it, meetings with the internal staff, partnerships, whatever it is, and then say, where do I want the company to be in? And what do my colors and the allocations of those blocks need to be over time? Then not only make it intentional, but review it in the rearward weekly. Did I do what I planned to do? And allocate my time to getting myself out of being the hub in the spoke wheel, to being completely out of the hub and spoke.
No, I think that's very good advice. I like that.
I had to do this. I was the idiot, being the know-it-all, just kissing my biceps saying, yeah, I'm important. I was the idiot who thought the world revolved around me, until I realized I was choking people to death and not allowing them to grow. I had to make mistakes, right? Yeah. And so you can feel this. My questions come about because I made all those mistakes.
Yeah.
And including, I came up with, so how come we have better sales when I sell it? We seem to be able to do better. How come nobody else does it? Mm-hmm. Until I realized Well, I've got to get used to and comfortable with lower conversion rates because I'll have more quantity of
Yeah,
sales units being sold within a given period of time because
correct,
I'm not involved,
correct. Yeah,
right? The math game is better.
right.
So it's a hard thing to do. And so tell me this, as you look at the multiple businesses that grew, what are some things to keep an eye out for beyond the topics we talked about as our first time founders are listening intently, picking up, little gems here and there? Do you look back and you say, what are some things, or maybe the three biggest issues that you kept coming up against, things of that sort, with maybe some illustrations or color that you can provide?
So sure. Yeah. So I think, well, sort of three learnings in almost in sequence for me. Very early on, while my first startup was in 1998, it really wasn't, I didn't have equity. I was an employee. I didn't have equity. I didn't know anything about it, actually. So the dot-com bubble grew and then burst without Tom Turner realizing what was going on. So again, I got more EQ than IQ. So I went to the next one in 2001 after the bubble had burst and everybody was fleeing startups. And I decided I'd go to one. And of course, found out that, the product was delayed. We'd run out of money. It was all the disasters. Anyway, the thing that I learned early is that you have to understand your ecosystem, because you can get so very focused on what's right for you. And by you, I mean, it can mean the company that you represent, the solution that you own as a product manager, or the job that you're doing. And I remember learning a chastening lesson at actually the very first company, because we helped secure Oracle databases and PeopleSoft systems, which were horribly insecure, it turned out, in the late 90s. But because there really weren't hackers and viruses and worms, what tended to happen was large-scale rollouts of ERP and database systems were being held up by audit findings from the big consulting firms who'd say, hey, one of the things that you should do, Mr. Big Bank in New York, is make sure that you have an audit trail and the ability to be able to force password changes on these really important Oracle and human resource systems that you're deploying, and you can't do that yet. This is where our software came in. So I designed a software campaign, a marketing campaign, all about people's frustration level with PeopleSoft security or Oracle security, and it had wonderful art of a frustrated administrator who can't get his job done because his rollout has been delayed, and went to a large PeopleSoft trade show in San Francisco. And our booth was really busy, because our title across our booth was "Frustrated by PeopleSoft Security." And then the alliance managers from PeopleSoft arrived and said, "This is our event. Your marketing tagline is about how bad our security was." So that lesson number one, you're always working in an ecosystem, and so you need to understand what your ecosystem looks like. And so that was a chastening, lesson. I think the next thing I learned, so a company I was at called Okina was acquired by Cisco. And, part of the success was in the marketing team that I ran. It was very small, but we started to do a lot of what, was then called online marketing that, wasn't done very often. So, for example, you could buy a number of impressions from Google back in the day. This is when Google was an early stage search engine. And so fast forward to my next company after I'd done my 2 years at Cisco, I think, well, I'm going to do all the same things and it's going to work great. So I went into this next company, similar size. I was employee 30 something. I was running marketing, and none of it worked because, everything moves. So that was a lesson about, okay, you got to be adaptive. And so I think that considered, that continued, going into IBM and then leaving IBM and going to BitSight. I mean, the methods of engaging at any point in the life cycle, from the funnel to the customer deployment, changes all the time, whether it's software or the appetite of the consumer about how they want to be engaged. So being adaptive, I think, was a lesson that I learned sort of after my first successful stint in a startup and being acquired. And then I think the one that remains consistent, Benoit, is the danger of assumptions, and sort of to assuming that things will be done, assuming that people's experience will dictate that they are practicing all of the things that they have learned in the past. And that, for the companies that I advise today, well, you sit in board meetings with me, and my big thing is, all right, are we watching the conversations that sales reps are having with clients? And that comes from a very hard-earned history of always assuming that because we were hiring people with experience from companies whose brands we recognized, or with a track record of success, that they would already be practicing the things that, we would expect them to in terms of consistency, message refinement, better engagement with clients. And when you make that assumption and you don't go back and check and remeasure and refine, it ends up slowing your progress down tremendously. And so for every company I've ever been at, there have been assumptions that I would make about a person that I hired, or a team that we put in place, or a process that we started, or a piece of software that we deployed, to make our company work better. The assumption that people would do the things that, if we told them once, you always think that should be enough, but that's an assumption that is always wrong. You have to go back, you have to check, you have to refine it, you have to measure it again. So I would say making assumptions about what people should do and are doing without a good way to measure whether that is actually the case or not, and then how to improve it, that's probably the biggest thing.
That was lovely, mate. I wrote it down in sequence, having an understanding of the complete ecosystem, making sure that we're always nimble and adapting to it. It changes so fast. I truly support you. We fellow marketeers hear that and feel that the most, as well as the danger of assumptions, which leads then, I have to ask this, in the journey, you've also figured out that you've got something that others don't. Somehow or another, Tom Turner's figured out, I'm particularly good at these skills, or I have an innate talent to be able to make a contribution. And I can tell you right now, I am also not an idea person. I'm very poor at original thought. I am good at when somebody says, this is the product and this is the business, I'll go, oh, I know how to take that and put together an entire system from the left-hand side to selling it. I can see that in my brain, and so I can put the Lego pieces together in sequence to get there. That's one of my. It's strategic as well as operationally. I can see it with a marketing sort of a emphasis. What have you figured out that Tom particularly has as a gift or a series of gifts to help?
So it is nice to have the benefit of hindsight. And I realized that I entered cybersecurity was an extremely technical world in the late 90s. And I didn't have any technical capability. And I was never going to acquire what I felt was the the sort of the mean level of technical conversation. And so all I could bring to bear was my background, which was, I had been a teacher before I got into to high tech, was communicating. And it turns out that there was a really important communication gap between people who made interesting technology that solved a security problem and an audience that didn't know they had a problem in the first place. If they did feel they had a problem, they weren't sure how to, they weren't sure how to go find the solution. If they found the solution, they weren't sure how to articulate its value to somebody more senior in their company. And they certainly wouldn't be able to articulate the business benefit. And so I think by accident, I ended up in that gap of being able to translate between the bits and bytes and the thing that this technology did and the audience, that what they really required was, well, what problems will it solve for me from a business perspective? How will it make my life easier? How do I get others to get on board and embrace this as a solution for our company? I realized that I had that ability.
Yes.
And so that was one thing. And then I think the other thing is, like you, I don't come up with ideas, but I always think of myself as I'm a pretty good lowest common denominator. Like if I get it, then I think there's probably a big enough market for it. So there's lots of interesting security technologies that I've looked at and companies that I've looked at, but the ones that I ended up going to, I realize, because I could wrap my head around the offering, and I felt that that was going to be interesting enough to a broad enough set of people. And, so I realized that I sort of have that. I can spot an idea that is, if it's well articulated, that'll have broad appeal. And then I think we've talked, the other pieces that, everyone talks about chief revenue officers now. And a lot of that's just a title, right? It means you're head of sales, but a true chief revenue officer actually does and should sit above sales, marketing, customer success, partnerships. That was actually my career history, going marketing into sales, into channels, into business development. And so being able to stitch those four worlds together and make my teams work together, I think that was a skill that was rare at the time. There are more and more people, true chief revenue officers, that are doing that because, people realize that certainly in an early stage organization that starts to grow quickly, you have to have alignment and intersection points between those functions. So,
thank you. Loved it. I've been trying not to ask this question, but I'm going to ask it. I encountered it again this week. Startup founders have got to build a strong, experienced team. Invariably, there are always and it's usually in sales, that the leader or someone in sales says, do you want me to sell or do you want me to document the CRM? You smile knowingly. What advice would you give to a CEO, a founder, on how to help the revenue chief understand the need for such, not compliance, but adherence, maybe, right?
yeah,
It's an age-old topic, so I'm going to bring it up because
it's a good one.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the glib answer is find someone like me who is in marketing who, would actually do a lot of that, because it was important that's how you build the right relationship with sales, and then can explain to, I always think sales is an incredible craft, and I'm certainly in the marketing world. I used to be pretty unique, because people would think there was a way they thought about salespeople, and there was a way salespeople talk about marketing. I think sales, particularly in an early stage company, is a noble endeavor, because you are going out with very little, very little to help you except your skill set. And you are testing and proving this. So my answer for your early stage leaders is, you want a salesperson who ideally has come from a background that's done early stage. There's nothing worse, I think, as an early stage founder and CEO than hiring somebody with a title from a big company, because that doesn't mean that they're not good at what they do. They don't have experience of the early stage environment. You have to have someone who's got that. And then ideally you want to have, you want to have either yourself or others that you hire to accompany that revenue leader, who have respect for the hard work that is trying to build a market when no one knows who you are. Maybe people don't even know that your problem space exists. They don't even know they have this problem. And so being able to empower and support that sales team is probably one of the artifacts that you're going to get from that, is then being able to build cooperation, and how things outside of the client engagement should be integrated, coordinated, stitched together, so that when he or she needs to hire their next 4 or 5 salespeople, that you can build that plan. When that person is going to come online, how many months before they start to be productive. That's the way to sort of encourage and instruct what can be seen as this compliance thing about, all right, if you don't fill it all in, because there should be, back to this operational machine that you build, what you're trying to get to is, at the end, as you head towards the end of the year, you're going to sit with your revenue leader and say, okay, we're going to try and grow X amount by next year. And there should be a formula that says, okay, if we're going to hire 7 salespeople, 5 of them will make it, and those 5 will come online based on our history at this point in their tenure with the company. But we also know, because we're starting to tie all this together, that 2 or 3 of them are going to come online earlier. And the reason they come online earlier may be because of some of the things that they're doing here, and how they are, plotting a through line from when they got the lead to how they engaged. And so that's how I would encourage your listeners to sort of sell it that way, because that is the reason for doing it. It's not for, there are companies where it's about attribution. Again, I was at a large company where some of the marketing team spent a lot of their time just wanting to tag their activities to opportunities that were going to close. And that's not what you want to do. You want your revenue partners to do it because they know that the more we learn as a company, the easier it is to engage with an ideal customer prospect, the quicker it is to move through the engagement cycle, the smoother the integration of your solution into the customer's day-to-day operation, and the more likely the renewal is to happen, and the greater the possibility that that customer will be open and interested in your other solutions. That does not happen by pure hero selling, nor does it happen when all you're asking people to do is to comply. You have to draw the picture of why this makes them better, why it makes their commission easier to retire, why it makes it easier for them to hit their life goals that they want to hit.
That was a brilliant ending, mate. We've run out of time.
Okay.
Can you tell, we could have talked more. There were so many things that you talked about just then. That was brilliant, because what you said at the end is not only get people that have that background, so you're not only getting novices that you have to coerce into this adherence, but to help them succeed in life, because that's part of this this systemization of that business. We've run out of time, Tom. Dude, that was wonderful. Thank you.
It's really nice to have me. Thank you. I enjoyed it.
That was so much fun. Really, we're gonna we may ping you back for another meeting. For everybody else on our show, thank you once again. Thanks for being with us. Please tell others about it. We want to help as many people as we can. Please share it, like it, follow us, and thank you again for tuning in. And Tom, thanks so much. Until next time.